Did I?
Yeah.
Is it close?
Linda Kase Gottlieb.
Kase Gottlieb. Thank you. I apologize.
Thank you for allowing me to talk here today. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist and a licensed clinical social worker by the state of New York. I have treated more than 500 children. I hope I didn't lose time from this. I have treated more than 500 children who have to some degree experienced some degree of alienation. And I've heard the heartbreaking stories of so many people here today that I've heard all before, even though I've never met one of the people who have spoken here before, because the sagas are all the same, but only the names change. I testify all over the country to document for the presence of alienation and to critique the typical custody evaluations that miss the alienation as Dr. Miller just described. They actually do get it backwards most of the time. The alienator is viewed and deemed as the competent parent, and the targeted or alienated parent is seen as an hysterical paranoid. I'm here to say that alienation does exist. I believe it is a syndrome. I wrote a book about it. And like Dr. Miller, I no longer use the word syndrome because of the controversy, but we shouldn't get stuck on labels. The American Bar Association itself published a book by Clower and Rivlin.
Excuse me just a moment. Folks, we're having a hard time hearing the witness. If you need to talk, could you please take it into the hall? Thank you. I'm sorry, go ahead.
The American Bar Association published a book written by Clower and Rivlin that determined that alienation exists to some degree in 80% of all cases of divorce. They followed 700 children for 12 years to determine this. And now, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, number 5, that was just produced this year, now documents that alienation does exist. You can find it on page 715 and 716. And they've determined that it is a dysfunctional parent-child interactional pattern, and it creates severe symptoms in the child. It also did something else. On page 719, it defines this dysfunctional family dynamic as psychological abuse of a child. And therefore, I submit that we need to treat these cases of alienation, whether mild, severe, or moderate, as a form of emotional abuse subject to CPS investigation. And if it's determined that the obsessive alienator is incorrigible, we need to treat it like any other case of child abuse. That's removal from the alienating parent because they are abusing the child. And I documented in my book, there is a chapter where I listed all the reasons why it is child abuse. I also want to say that the remedy has to be a form of family therapy. Individual approaches do not work. You can't bring a child into therapy and think they're going to change their parents. They are part of a dysfunctional dynamic, and you can't bring any more than you can bring one party to a peace table and think that you're going to get results. Reunification therapy will fail, and I know that from my practice working with children and families for 40 years. If that child goes home to an obsessed, incorrigible alienator who never manages to get referred to the therapy. The victims are sent to therapy, the targeted parent and the child. That makes no sense at all to me. So for 1 hour a week, you're going to work with two people who have been disempowered by the alienator, by the mental health professional, which 90% do not know how to identify this, by the court system, who are at a loss because my own profession doesn't document it for them, so how is the judicial system supposed to recognize it when the mental health community doesn't? And the alienating parent is off on the sideline. So we need to have specially trained family therapists or other mental health professionals who have had specialized training. And I do have to say, only the degree of family therapy has had this specialized training. You would be surprised that even most psychiatrists and psychological degrees don't even have Family Dynamics 101 as part of their basic training. And yet they're evaluating family dynamics. It's a real problem. This is definitely something that's billable to the insurance companies, because these children, and I have seen it time and again, they suffer depression, anxiety, delusional thinking, suicidal ideation, post-traumatic stress disorder. These children have symptoms. They are billable. It's a family therapy CPT code of 90847. Don't let anyone tell you it can't be billed. If they don't know this, either they're not trained and shouldn't be doing the therapy, or else they want to make the money on the side because insurance companies don't pay that much. I've devoted my career to that. I don't take cash for these cases. I only bill for family therapy because that's what you want to do to help people.
And could we ask you to summarize, please?
Yes. And I do believe in shared parenting. It's very important. I've heard some of the wild statements made here before. It doesn't work. Well, I direct people to the book, for example, Mom's House, Dad's House by PhD Isolina Ricci. She suggests in her book many ways that it works. In my book, I've written why shared parenting works. Children need both parents. The obsessed alienator may be the exception. Obviously, the few exceptions, the drug abuse, the sociopaths, we're talking about shared parenting for fit parents. And by and large, most of these cases involve fit parents. We shouldn't be asking children to have to cut off a right arm or a left arm. That's what you're doing when you're asking them to choose one parent over the other. They need both parents. We must take that choice of sole custody away from parents. You know, the Scandinavian countries don't have this system. The lawyers don't make money, it's true, but they go in there and they say, shared parenting, make it work. It's not solved in an adversarial system, and it works. And that's what we need to start thinking here. That's what we need to do, because we're ruining a whole generation of children.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions?
Okay, can you please just explain, or not explain, but I'm having a real difficult time with having all these different therapists saying that they do not accept insurance because there's no diagnosis code. It will be insurance fraud for them to do it. There's court-appointed people, families that go to therapists that have a PhD. They're part of the Connecticut Department of Health, where they have a license to practice mental health, but they will say that they are consulting or they are providing resources. And from everything I've heard, these families are emotionally fractured, and there's all these things. So can you explain why this is happening, and does it happen in New York too? Because
I hear the same stories in New York. I have to tell you, if you read my book, every child in my book whose relationship with a parent was severed has severe emotional, behavioral, and cognitive problems. What I read, depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, these are reimbursable insurance. If it's medical necessity and the therapist accepts that insurance plan, they must accept the insurance for their services. And the CPT code is a valid code. It's 90847 if the child is present. It's 90846 if I'm doing collateral co-parent counseling and the child is not present. And most insurance companies now do cover family therapy. So I don't know what the motives are. I don't know your therapist here. All I can tell you is it is a valid code, and the symptoms in the kid require it. The family therapy is medical necessity.
Are you aware that in the therapy associated with court-appointed therapists, they charge upwards of $375 for their 50-minute session, and they say that they're providing resources? I don't know any parent who wants to pay $375 for resources when they're in a high-conflict situation and they're paying a GAL, they're paying all these other people. They need mental health professionals that are going to help them. So,
well, resources isn't the remedy for these symptoms. It's co-parent counseling. The word is counseling right in there. Reunification therapy, the word therapy is right in there. If they're distorting, I consider it fraud what they're doing.
Go ahead, Dr. Hawk.
Linda, I wonder if you could just say a little more about shared custody. When you say having two parents is good for kids, I mean, I think most people agree with that concept. But looking again at the charge for this task force, do you have some thoughts about wording in legislation that would relate to shared parenting?
Again, I believe it's in the best interest of the child to have shared parenting when you have two.
But what do you mean by that term?
I believe that it's joint legal custody, and I believe that physical custody has to approach 50-50 as close as possible. Now, we have a lot of research. There's been a lot of papers submitted in Arizona's in support of the recently passed legislation in Arizona for 50-50 shared custody. So there's no question in my mind that that's what's needed. The problem is that we give parents a choice, and this is something they shouldn't have a choice about. They're angry. I understand that. A lot of people get divorced. You're not thrilled with your former partner. You wouldn't be divorcing them. Take the choice away, and I really think we have to move from the best interests of the child to the concept of shared parenting, make it work. And like I say, in the Scandinavian countries, for example, that's the mandate, and they make it work. They have no choice. When I was in school, and I'm dating myself, so please don't do the math, everyone. It was 1964. We were debating the Civil Rights Act, and it was a sociology class, and one of my other students raised his hand and said, you can't enforce morality. It'll never work, the Civil Rights Act. And my professor, Ed Sagarin, who was quite famous, I found out later, said, you're right, we can't enforce morality. But we're not talking about morality here. We're talking about behavior. And when you have the right legislation, and it's clear that if a parent says, I will not participate and facilitate the relationship with the other parent, well, maybe then they shouldn't have physical custody. Maybe then they give up their rights to it. There need to be consequences, like for anything else. You impose the right consequences, you enforce behavior. We are a society of laws.
Thank you very much. Now we have what looks like the Krajewski family. Kenneth, followed by Andrea, and then Brenda, and then Joey Watley, and then Douglas Morrow.
Ask the committee, 2 of the 5 of my witnesses that were going to testify for my children have left, and Jerry has an appointment if he could go in front of me.